the Sacred Band of Thebes. In 378 BCE, during a turbulent period in ancient Greece, a newly formed military unit began drawing attention within the fortified city-state of Thebes. Composed of exactly 300 men arranged in 150 intimate pairs, this force was not built on rank or lineage, but on something far more unusual for its time: bonded love. Known only to a few outside Theban command, the group trained in absolute secrecy. Their emergence on the battlefield would later shake the foundations of Greek military orthodoxy. What they achieved defied not just the Spartans, but logic itself. The Sacred Band of Thebes was unlike anything ancient warfare had seen. Unlike typical hoplite formations, this unit trained year-round, even in peacetime. Its members were not conscripts or aristocrats, but elite volunteers selected for their physical prowess and unwavering loyalty to their partners. These warriors fought not for land or gold, but to protect the man at their side. Their bond, rooted in both emotion and discipline, formed a phalanx that refused to break. Descriptions from ancient historians like Plutarch and Xenophon depict a terrifying precision in the Sacred Band's maneuvers. They moved as one body, pivoting formations on uneven terrain, striking with synchronized lethality. During the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, this unit faced down the seemingly invincible Spartan army. In an unprecedented tactical maneuver, Theban general Epaminondas placed the Sacred Band at the core of an oblique attack formation. The result? The Spartan right wing collapsed under pressure, and their legendary dominance over Greece ended that day. The shock of Sparta's defeat echoed throughout the ancient world, yet rather than being celebrated, the unit quickly slipped into obscurity. Following the rise of Macedon, Philip II of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, sought to eliminate threats to his consolidation of power. In 338 BCE, during the Battle of Chaeronea, the Sacred Band fought to the last man. Their final stand was marked not by retreat, but by encirclement and obliteration. After the battle, Philip reportedly walked the field and, upon learning who they were, expressed sorrow rather than triumph. Still, records of their deeds were never widely circulated. No monuments commemorated their tactics, and in Theban history, their memory was folded into silence. What makes the Sacred Band so difficult to reconcile with conventional military evolution is not just their effectiveness, but their very existence. In a time dominated by hierarchy, machismo, and rigid phalanx formations, they introduced a radically personal form of combat, one based on emotional connection and psychological unity. No comparable force with such structure appears in any known army for the next 2,000 years. The very idea of a combat unit formed through romantic bonds remains an anomaly, defying every known pattern of martial organization. Today, excavations near Chaeronea have revealed a mass grave believed to be their final resting place. 300 skeletons, buried side by side in matched pairs. But beyond this, few official records remain. No military doctrine ever sought to replicate them. No empire dared to reintroduce such a structure. They remain a military phenomenon that should not have existed, but did, once and with terrifying success. If their model had been adopted widely, the psychology of warfare might have evolved in ways we still cannot imagine. But it was not. And perhaps that silence, more than their sacrifice, is what makes the Sacred Band a mystery still marching through time. The Immortals of Persia. In 480 BCE, during the Second Persian invasion of Greece, Greek scouts stationed near Thermopylae reported something terrifying. A perfectly synchronized column of 10,000 soldiers, clad in gleaming robes, carrying spears that shimmered in the morning sun, advanced in total silence. They did not chant, shout, or signal. They simply moved, always 10,000, always the same, as if no man ever fell. These were not myths or phantoms. They were real. They were the Immortals. The force known as the Immortals served as the standing elite core of the Achaemenid Empire, guarding the Persian kings from the reign of Cyrus the Great through to Darius III. According to Herodotus, their name derived from their extraordinary continuity. Whenever a soldier fell in battle or by illness, he was instantly replaced, often within hours. So the unit always maintained a consistent count of exactly 10,000 men. Their constancy became legend, so much so that enemy soldiers believed them to be truly deathless. But what truly set the Immortals apart was not just their numbers, it was their composition. They were not simply an honor guard. They carried composite bows capable of firing with exceptional power, short spears with iron blades, and wickerwork shields that were both lightweight and strangely resilient. Beneath their tunics, many wore scale armor made of bronze, iron, or even gilded fish scale plating. This combination of protection, speed, and striking range made them unusually versatile for an era still dominated by rigid infantry lines. Even more puzzling was their strategic deployment. The Immortals could operate in mountainous terrain, river valleys, or urban strongholds without altering formation. Persian records refer to their operations in campaigns across Egypt, India, and Central Asia. Their internal hierarchy was structured more like a modern rapid response division than a conventional ancient army. They moved with their own supply lines, camp followers, and engineers, allowing them to function as a mobile strike force, capable of independent action far from the main army. Despite their high profile, however, their full structure was never openly documented. Most of what is known comes from indirect Greek sources and a few recovered Persian reliefs. Their barracks have never been found. No official manuals or orders of battle survive. Even their replacements were drawn from a pool of nobility and tribal elites whose identities were kept secret. It is believed that even within the corps, many soldiers did not know the true identity of their immediate replacements. After the fall of the Achaemenid Empire to Alexander the Great, the Immortals vanished. No successor empire continued the tradition. Their model, so precise, so modern in form, was never replicated. Historians continue to debate whether the secrecy surrounding them was due to strategic reasons, or whether they represented something even more anomalous, a force whose origin, funding, and philosophy lay outside standard imperial command. The silence is unsettling. For a unit so effective, so feared, and so logistically advanced, the Immortals leave behind no central archive, no veteran memoirs, no blueprint. They arrived, executed, and disappeared, leaving only conflicting testimonies and stone reliefs as proof of their existence. If the Immortals truly operated as described, constant in number, untouchable in battle, organized far beyond their contemporaries, then they challenge every assumption we hold about ancient military evolution. And if they were never meant to leave records, then perhaps their silence was not an accident. The Roman Testudo units. In 52 BCE, during the siege of Alesia, Julius Caesar's legions executed a maneuver that left the defending Gallic tribes bewildered. As volleys of arrows and slings rained down from the fortifications, entire Roman cohorts advanced unscathed, shield to shield, locked together like scaled armor. From above, they looked less like men and more like a moving fortress. This was no myth. This was the Testudo formation, Latin for tortoise, a tactic so precise and resilient that it resembled mechanized armor long before tanks were conceived. The Roman Testudo was not merely a defensive posture, it was a mobile strategy. Soldiers arranged their rectangular scuda shields in overlapping rows. Those in front held their shields forward, while those on the sides and top raised theirs overhead and to the flanks, creating a solid dome-like shell. The result was a human engine that could push through missile fire, breach gates, or approach siege walls without suffering major losses. It wasn't just impenetrable, it was psychological warfare. Ancient sources like Cassius Dio, Livy, and Polybius describe the Testudo as one of the most feared and disciplined tactics in the Roman arsenal. It required extreme coordination. Even one soldier misaligned would compromise the integrity of the formation, and yet it was deployed repeatedly in the most chaotic environments, under fire, on uneven terrain, even in waterlogged conditions. What's more unsettling is how mechanically advanced the tactic was. Military historians today struggle to explain how pre-modern soldiers, wearing 40-pound armor kits and carrying long shields, could maintain geometric formation under attack while moving uphill. Reconstruction suggests that their spacing, weight distribution, and shield angles had to be pre-calculated with mathematical precision. The average legionary was not a mere grunt. He was a cog in a machine. But the real mystery lies not in the tactic itself, but in its apparent disappearance. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Testudo was abandoned. Medieval warfare, even with its massive siege battles, never replicated the Roman tortoise. Not during the Crusades, not during the Mongol invasions. No other civilization engineered infantry cohesion on such a modular, mobile scale. Why? Some argue the tactic was too rigid for the chaotic skirmishes of the Middle Ages. Others suggest it required a level of training and discipline that few post-Roman societies could afford. But a more disconcerting theory persists in military circles, that the Testudo was not just a formation. It was the product of a system of combat psychology, logistics, and synchronized training that was centuries ahead of its time and impossible to resurrect without the Roman military-industrial framework. Even Roman records provide no full blueprint. There are no surviving manuals with exact formation diagrams or timing sequences. Most reconstructions come from artwork, vague textual references, and guesswork based on shield dimensions. It is as if the Testudo was never meant to be fully understood, only performed, only witnessed, and then forgotten. If the Roman Testudo truly functioned as a self-contained armored organism, then it represents not just a tactical innovation, but an evolutionary dead end in warfare, an anomaly of perfection that the world was never able or allowed to repeat. The Han Dynasty crossbow divisions. In 202 BCE, during a decisive confrontation between the forces of Liu Bang and Xiang Yu, reports from battlefield observers spoke of a peculiar sound, rhythmic, rapid, mechanical. It wasn't drums or marching. It was the synchronized thrum of crossbows releasing bolts at an unnatural tempo. Witnesses claimed entire enemy formations collapsed before ever reaching sword range. This was not exaggeration. It was the result of one of the most advanced military technologies the ancient world had ever seen, the Han Dynasty's repeating crossbow divisions. The Han Empire, rising from the ashes of the Qin, revolutionized Chinese warfare in a way few modern militaries fully comprehend. At the core of their innovation was the mass deployment of crossbow infantry, some equipped with a mechanical trigger assembly, others with early versions of repeating crossbows. These were not simple wooden arms. Excavated examples from sites like Mawangdui and Mancheng reveal crossbows constructed from layered wood, bronze alloy, and tensioned sinew, capable of launching bolts with lethal force up to 260 feet away. But what stunned archaeologists most was the trigger mechanism, a bronze locking system that operated with such precision that even modern engineers acknowledge its sophistication. These crossbows had adjustable tension, mechanical safety locks, and calibrated trigger pulls. Some were standardized with interchangeable parts, unheard of in a time when most weapons were handmade. Chinese texts like the Wujing Zongyao, compiled later during the Song Dynasty, reference earlier versions of these technologies, suggesting they were in use long before Europe's first crossbows emerged. Even more baffling was the tactical organization of Han crossbow units. They were not auxiliary or support. They were mainline combatants, arranged in platoons, equipped with shields and multi-shot quivers, supported by engineers who could repair crossbows in the field. Their volleys were timed, coordinated, and often combined with fire arrows, signaling systems, and advancing infantry. In some campaigns, these divisions were supported by mobile carts, what we would now call platforms, allowing soldiers to shoot from higher elevation or behind cover. How was such a system possible in the 2nd century BCE? Han logistics may hold the clue. The empire maintained state-run arsenals with strict quality control, standardized weapon molds, and serial inscriptions to track gear, essentially early military factories. But unlike Roman or Greek records, no full instruction manual for Han crossbow use has survived. Much of what we know comes from tomb relics, fragmentary texts, and the baffled observations of their enemies. When later Chinese dynasties returned to sword and spear combat, the high technology of Han warfare was quietly abandoned. By the time of the Tang, crossbows were still used, but never again in the same structured, industrialized way. Some suggest that the complexity of maintaining such units became unsustainable. Others whisper of internal policies that deliberately erased the techniques, fearing they could be used against the empire itself. Modern tests on surviving Han crossbows have confirmed their power, accuracy, and mechanical integrity, even after 2 millennia underground. In one reconstruction, a replica pierced a wooden shield at over 200 feet. But the organization that wielded these weapons with synchronized precision is lost to history. If the Han Crossbow Corps truly functioned as a mechanized infantry force in the ancient world, then our understanding of military development is fundamentally flawed. It suggests that at least once, long before the Industrial Age, someone cracked the formula for mass-produced precision killing and then buried it, the Varangian Guard. In the year 988 CE, as crowds gathered within the towering halls of Constantinople's imperial palace, something unexpected appeared among the Byzantine emperor's elite entourage. Towering warriors, cloaked in bear and wolf pelts, wielding massive two-handed axes unlike anything seen in the Mediterranean, marched with eerie calm behind the emperor. Their pale features and northern dialect set them apart. These were not Greeks, Romans, or even Eastern Christians. They were Vikings. And yet, they served as the personal bodyguard of the Eastern Roman Emperor. They were the Varangian Guard, a military anomaly that defied geography, culture, and logic. The formation of this unit was rooted in an unlikely alliance. Emperor Basil II, facing rebellion within his empire, sought the aid of Prince Vladimir of Kievan-Rus. In exchange for military support, Basil offered an imperial marriage and full conversion to Christianity. In return, Vladimir sent 6,000 of his fiercest warriors, battle-hardened Norse mercenaries, south. These were not just raiders. Many were seasoned fighters from campaigns across England, Ireland, and Frankish lands. Their experience, discipline, and brute strength made them ideal candidates for a role the emperor needed filled, a guard force loyal not to any noble house, but to him alone. Unlike traditional Byzantine soldiers, the Varangians operated outside the empire's political machinery. They answered directly to the emperor, swore no allegiance to local governors, and were often housed separately within fortified barracks. Their primary weapon was the rhomphaia, a type of long-handled axe they wielded with such skill that accounts describe them cleaving through both armor and horse in a single blow. They trained in shield walls, close-quarters protection tactics, and urban suppression. In effect, they were a medieval special operations unit. But the strangest element of the Varangian Guard was their autonomy. They were allowed to speak their native tongue, retain cultural rituals, and even practice limited forms of Norse worship under the guise of imperial service. They became known not just for their ferocity in war, but for their incorruptibility. Unlike Byzantine officials, the Varangians were famously immune to bribery. Their loyalty was legendary, so much so that emperors trusted them not only in battle, but in the most sensitive palace intrigues. The Guard remained active for over 300 years, serving under dozens of emperors. They fought in Sicily, Anatolia, and the Balkans. Their numbers fluctuated, but their identity remained unique. Warriors from the frozen north embedded in the heart of Eastern imperial power. They left behind inscriptions, runes carved into marble balustrades of Constantinople's churches, as if marking territory that should never have been theirs. Yet for all their service, they vanished without ceremony. By the late 14th century, the rise of gunpowder warfare and shifting politics made them obsolete. The Byzantines themselves were on the decline. No grand monument honors them. No military system since has adopted their model. Foreign elite soldiers given autonomy and direct allegiance to a head of state, trained not only for combat, but for palace-level intervention. Their presence poses a paradox. In an age where culture and religion defined loyalty, the Varangian Guard stood outside both, serving with unmatched devotion. They should not have existed by any measure of empire, ethnicity, or military structure. And yet, they not only existed, they thrived. If such a unit could flourish for centuries under the greatest empire of its time, what does it say about the boundaries of loyalty, identity, and control? Or, more hauntingly, why has no one dared to repeat their model? The Mamluk Cavalry. In 1260, in the valley of Ain Jalut, a thunderous silence preceded one of the most improbable victories in military history. The Mongol horde, unstoppable across Asia and Eastern Europe, was advancing again. But this time, they met a wall of cavalry that didn't retreat, didn't break, and didn't fear. Instead, they struck with surgical precision, dismounted Mongol archers, shattered their lines, and executed battlefield maneuvers that seemed centuries too modern. The victors were not an empire's standing army or a native militia. They were slave soldiers, elite warriors once owned, now commanders of a sultanate. They were the Mamluks. The Mamluks began as enslaved boys from Central Asia, the Caucasus, and southeastern Europe. Purchased young, they were indoctrinated into a strict military lifestyle, housed in barracks, forbidden from marrying or owning property during training, and taught that absolute loyalty lay with the Sultan. But what emerged from this brutal system was not a class of obedient pawns. It was a military caste with combat skills that surpassed most professional armies of their time. Trained from adolescence in mounted archery, swordsmanship, and formation tactics, Mamluk warriors were expected to master both individual combat and unit-based strategy. Their cavalry units drilled complex maneuvers resembling modern tank formations, flanking attacks, feigned retreats, sudden encirclements, all coordinated through horn signals and flag cues. Their composite bows could shoot accurately from horseback at over 300 feet. Their armor combined chainmail, lamellar plating, and hardened leather, providing agility without sacrificing protection. At Ain Jalut, these skills culminated in the first major Mongol defeat in open battle. The Mamluks used the Mongols' own tactics against them, luring them into a feigned retreat, then ambushing their cavalry in narrow terrain. Contemporary accounts describe a level of timing and cohesion that military analysts today liken to coordinated mechanized assaults. But unlike the Mongols, the Mamluks lacked a steppe culture or nomadic tradition. Their tactics were engineered, not inherited, and that's what makes them an anomaly. No other slave system in history produced a military elite that not only outlived their masters, but founded a dynasty. After toppling the Ayyubid rulers, the Mamluks seized power and ruled Egypt and the Levant for over 250 years. They became sultans, scholars, and patrons of science, all while preserving their militarized caste. Even stranger, their system was self-renewing. Mamluks were forbidden to pass on status to their children. Instead, the next generation of soldiers had to be recruited from the outside, trained from scratch, and tested in battle. It was a controlled cycle of elite warrior creation, with no bloodline or aristocracy. Despite their dominance, Mamluk military manuals remain elusive. Training regimens were often oral or coded, passed from master to apprentice. Surviving sources like the Zubdat al-Tawarikh offer only fragments, the full logic of their battlefield choreography, their uncanny ability to mimic enemy tactics, manipulate terrain, and adapt under pressure, remains largely undocumented. By the 16th century, firearms rendered traditional cavalry less effective. The Ottoman Empire absorbed the Mamluks, and their system faded. But for over 2 centuries, they existed as a paradox. Enslaved foreigners who became sovereign warriors. Outsiders who built an empire of insiders. If the Mamluk cavalry system were to be recreated today, it would require a blend of psychological conditioning, martial rigor, and socio-political isolation that borders on dystopian. And yet, it worked, not for years, but generations. What kind of world creates its most formidable defenders through captivity? And what does it mean when those defenders become rulers? The ninja units of Ige and Koga. In the year 1581, under the cloak of a moonless night, 40,000 troops loyal to Oda Nobunaga surrounded the mountainous province of Iga. What they expected was a swift conquest of scattered farming villages. What they encountered was something else: ambushes from invisible enemies, traps embedded in forest paths, messages intercepted before arrival, and fires set to supply depots from within. Nobunaga's generals couldn't explain it. No one had seen their attackers. No one heard their approach. Yet their armies bled. These were not ghosts or illusions. They were the operatives of Iga and Koga, the shadow units that would later be known as ninja. Contrary to popular myth, the ninja were not mythical figures in black robes performing supernatural feats. They were part of a real, highly trained system of asymmetric warfare that emerged in Japan during the chaotic Sengoku period. The clans of Iga and Koga, isolated in mountainous terrain and excluded from central power structures, developed a parallel military tradition based on stealth, sabotage, reconnaissance, and psychological warfare. Their operatives were not samurai, nor mercenaries. They were trained specialists, born into secrecy and raised in a culture of clandestine survival. Historical texts such as the Banzen Shukai, compiled in the 17th century, offer startling detail about their training. Operatives learned lockpicking, poisons, explosives, disguise, infiltration, and silent killing. They memorized regional dialects, climbing techniques, meteorological patterns, and even shadow projection, how to use moonlight to mislead pursuers. Some manuals include blueprints for collapsible ladders, water flotation shoes, and smoke release devices made from crushed seashells and sulfur compounds. But perhaps their most advanced feature was their structure. Ninja were organized into multi-role units: intelligence collectors, sabotage specialists, couriers, and decoys. They operated in cells, communicated through coded scripts, and often used false identities that rotated depending on the mission. In warfare, they would infiltrate enemy castles, set fires from inside, or impersonate defectors to spread disinformation. In peacetime, they functioned as covert agents embedded in rival territories. What makes these units so difficult to place in military history is their strategic sophistication. Their use of fear, unpredictability, and surgical precision aligns far more with modern special forces than with any feudal army. They operated under rules of engagement that deliberately blurred the line between combat and espionage, centuries before such distinctions were codified in military law. When Oda Nobunaga finally overran Iga in his brutal 1581 campaign, much of the ninja infrastructure was dismantled. Surviving operatives fled or were absorbed into rival clans, including the Tokugawa shogunate, which would later use their skills in internal surveillance. Yet, even as their influence spread, documentation vanished. The Tokugawa tightly controlled all references to ninja operations, and later periods mythologized them beyond recognition. Today, most knowledge of their real tactics comes from fragmented training scrolls and scattered mentions in battlefield logs. No other military force in the pre-modern world institutionalized stealth, subterfuge, and psychological disruption to this degree. The fact that they existed in a time when honor-based warfare dominated the Japanese battlefield only deepens the paradox. Their tactics were not just dishonorable by samurai standards, they were revolutionary. If the ninja of Iga and Koga had been allowed to evolve without suppression, what would modern covert operations look like today? Would intelligence agencies trace their doctrines not to 20th century innovations, but to mountain villages in 16th century Japan? Or more disturbingly, did they already? The Janissaries of the Ottoman Empire. In 1453, as the walls of Constantinople tremble under Ottoman cannon fire, defenders reported a strange rhythm rising beneath the chaos. It was not the beating of siege drums, nor the chants of common soldiers. It was the synchronized footfalls of a disciplined force moving in total unity, clad in distinct uniforms, their elite status unmistakable. These were the Janissaries, soldiers without families, trained from childhood, bound by oath to a sultan, and operating under a system so radical that historians still debate how such a force came to exist at all. The Janissary Corps was founded in the late 14th century by Sultan Murad I. Its structure defied the norms of medieval armies. These were not noble-born knights or mercenary battalions. They were Christian boys taken from conquered Balkan territories through the Dev-Shirme system, a forced levy where children were converted to Islam and trained under the empire's tightest control. But rather than being broken, these boys were transformed into the Ottoman Empire's most loyal and deadly soldiers. From the age of 7, Janissary recruits were separated from their communities, subjected to physical and psychological conditioning, and taught advanced warfare, discipline, music, and language. They lived communally, abstained from marriage, and answered only to the Sultan. Their training emphasized absolute obedience, but also tactical independence. Janissaries were taught to fight in dense formations, conduct nighttime operations, storm fortifications, and, most notably, use firearms centuries before many European armies adopted them. Indeed, by the 15th century, Janissaries were already deploying early matchlock muskets in battle. Their use of gunpowder weaponry, coupled with strict formation discipline, made them arguably the first standing infantry corps in Europe to master coordinated firearm combat. They also maintained their own internal hierarchy, barracks, and social order, effectively functioning as a state within a state, militarized, autonomous, and self-renewing. But this is where the anomaly deepens. Despite their power, the Janissaries were not permitted to marry, own land, or pass on their titles. They were, in theory, forever bonded to the state. Their identity was not ethnic, tribal, or familial. It was institutional. This model of soldiering was unlike anything in the medieval world. It resembled the professional militaries of modern nation-states far more than the feudal levies or mercenary forces of their time. For centuries, the Janissaries were the spear point of Ottoman conquest, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East and North Africa. Their victories included the fall of Constantinople, the Battle of Mohacs, and the defense of Vienna. And yet, they left behind no military manuals, no strategic treatises. What little we know comes from imperial decrees, travelogues, and European observers who were often awed by their coordination and fire discipline. By the 17th century, the system began to decay. Corruption crept in, Janissaries demanded political influence, and many defied the old rules, marrying, owning property, even selling their positions. When Sultan Mahmud II finally abolished the corps in 1826, he did so in what became known as the Auspicious Incident, a bloody purge to erase their legacy. No military before or after the Janissaries institutionalized total loyalty, ideological reprogramming, and centralized firearm training to such an extreme. Their existence was both a marvel of discipline and a warning of what happens when military autonomy becomes too powerful. If the Janissaries represented an early blueprint for modern special forces, then why was their model never adopted again? Or was it, quietly, in the formation of later shadow armies built on control, indoctrination, and erasure? The Anglo-Saxon Housecarls. In the early morning fog of October 14th, 1066, on a hill near Hastings, England, the elite guard of King Harold Godwinson stood unmoving. While Norman cavalry charged uphill in waves, these men, draped in mail and bearing massive two-handed axes, held the line. Their discipline was unnerving, their formation nearly impenetrable. Chroniclers later wrote that it was not the king's command that broke, but the hill itself. These men were not feudal knights or levied peasants. They were housecarls, the royal shock troops of Anglo-Saxon England, trained not just to fight, but to stand. The Housecarls were a professional warrior class, formed during the reign of King Canute in the early 11th century. In an age when most armies were seasonal levies, the Housecarls were full-time soldiers. They were paid directly from the royal treasury, lived in royal households, and accompanied the king across the realm. Their presence ensured both security and loyalty, but it was their battlefield behavior that defied the expectations of their time. Their primary weapon was the Danish axe, a massive two-handed weapon capable of cleaving through shield, armor, and bone. Measuring over 5 feet in length and weighing more than 6 pounds, it required extraordinary strength and precision. Yet archaeological studies show Housecarls used these axes not wildly, but with measured force, controlling arcs, timing strikes to disrupt cavalry charges or snap shield walls. The Bayeux Tapestry famously depicts one housecarl burying his axe into a Norman knight's horse mid-gallop, a calculated takedown strategy, not brute violence. More remarkably, the housecarls were trained to fight in shield wall formations, holding tight phalanx-like lines while wielding long-handled weapons, an ergonomic contradiction that required constant drilling and mutual trust. Their discipline in these formations gave Anglo-Saxon armies a stability rarely seen in Western Europe during the early medieval period. But their organization was equally perplexing. Housecarls answered directly to the king or to the high-ranking thanes, not to local lords. Their loyalty was centralized, their command structure streamlined. They rotated through service, allowing for rest, while maintaining a standing presence at royal courts, effectively acting as both palace guard and battlefield elite. In some records, they are referred to as hearth guard, a term implying their closeness to the ruler's inner sanctum. Despite their elite status, the Housecarls left behind no treatises, manuals, or strategic writings. Most of what is known comes from chronicles, poems, and battlefield accounts. Yet what these sources agree upon is chilling. They did not break. Even at Hastings, when flanked and outnumbered, they continued fighting as their king fell beside them. The last line to fall wasn't the general levy, it was the Housecarls. Their existence poses a puzzle. How did a society without a centralized military academy produce such a professionalized, disciplined force? And why did no other Western European monarchy adopt the model after their fall? Some theorists suggest that the Housecarls were a brief anomaly created by the rare confluence of Scandinavian martial culture and English royal organization. Others believe that their dissolution after the Norman conquest was intentional. William the Conqueror had no interest in reviving a force so loyal to a rival crown. Instead, he imposed the feudal system, scattering military power into the hands of vassals and suppressing centralized elite units. The silence around the Housecarls is telling. Their discipline, structure, and tactics should have influenced generations, but they did not. They were buried, figuratively and literally, with the fall of Anglo-Saxon England. If their model had continued, perhaps the centralized professional armies of Europe would have emerged centuries earlier. But they did not. And in that lost possibility lies a deeper question. Were the Housecarls erased because they failed, or because they succeeded too well? The Mongol heavy cavalry archers. In 1241, as European knights gathered near the Sajo River in Hungary to face what they believed was a disorganized horde, the ground began to shake, not from marching infantry, but from something far more precise. Waves of cavalry moved in concentric patterns, never stopping, never breaking formation. From hundreds of yards away, arrows fell in relentless volleys, each with deadly accuracy. Before any sword clashed, the European front had already buckled. These were not chaotic tribesmen. They were the heavy cavalry archers of the Mongol Empire, arguably the most disciplined and technologically sophisticated strike force the medieval world had ever seen. At the heart of the Mongol military machine was a structure that continues to baffle modern analysts. Their heavy cavalry was not simply about brute force. It was a synchronized system of rapid communication, strategic deception, and logistical precision. Each unit was organized into a decimal hierarchy, 10 men to a squad, 10 squads to a company, and so on, scaling up to tens of thousands. Orders were relayed instantly through flag signals, smoke cues, and a network of mounted messengers, enabling battlefield responses that mirrored modern command and control systems. What made the Mongol heavy cavalry archers so lethal was their hybrid capability. These were not light skirmishers. They wore hardened leather and lamellar armor, often reinforced with iron or lacquered plates. Yet, despite their protection, they retained mobility rivaling that of unarmored troops. Their bows, made of layered horn, sinew, and wood, had a draw weight surpassing 100 pounds and could shoot accurately beyond 300 yards. They fired from horseback, at full gallop, with remarkable consistency. Historical reports from Chinese, Persian, and European sources all describe the same nightmare. Death arriving before the enemy even appeared on the horizon. But beyond their weapons, it was the cohesion that defied belief. Units could feign retreat for miles, luring enemies into ambushes. Cavalry columns could split and reunite mid-battle, encircling fortifications with eerie coordination. In sieges, Mongols deployed early forms of gunpowder, siege towers, and psychological warfare, including flaming corpses catapulted over walls to spread panic. They did this not sporadically, but systematically across continents. Even more unsettling is how little record survives of their internal doctrine. Genghis Khan and his successors issued military codes, like the Yasa, but these were kept secret. The empire's tactics were passed orally, through generational training and battlefield apprenticeship. European knights bound by chivalric codes and rigid formations were unprepared for an enemy that fought like a modern force, with speed, intelligence, and operational depth. What's difficult to explain is how a nomadic culture with no standing cities or academic institutions managed to produce such a war machine. The Mongols had no war colleges, no permanent fortresses, no written manuals of strategy. Yet their forces coordinated multi-front invasions stretching from Korea to Hungary, often across hostile and unknown terrain. Some historians suggest their success lay in adaptability. Mongol generals incorporated foreign technologies, engineers, and maps into their campaigns. Others argue their brilliance came from necessity, a need to win or perish in the harsh steppes of Central Asia. But neither fully accounts for the scale and consistency of their victories. When the Mongol Empire fragmented in the 14th century, no successor state was able to replicate their military cohesion. The Ottoman Sipahi, the Mamluks, the Russian Cossacks, all adopted fragments of Mongol tactics, but none could recreate the total battlefield awareness and control that defined Mongol heavy cavalry. If the Mongol cavalry had left behind detailed records, perhaps today's military doctrines would look very different, but they did not. And perhaps that silence was intentional, because what they knew was never meant to be written, only performed. Conclusion: throughout history, certain military forces have emerged not as evolutionary steps, but as complete anomalies, elite units that should not have existed based on the political systems, technologies, or cultural mindsets of their time. The 10 units we've just examined were not only effective, they were precise, organized, and, in some cases, terrifyingly modern. Their existence challenges the linear view of military development and forces us to reconsider what humanity was truly capable of, centuries or even millennia ahead of what we accept as the standard timeline. These were not isolated incidents. The Sacred Band, Immortals, Janissaries, Ninja, and others all reveal a deeply unsettling pattern. Societies that briefly unlocked the formula for elite military precision only to lose or bury it soon after. In most cases, the units disappeared not through defeat, but through quiet erasure. No public archives, no manuals, no successors. Just fragments, scattered across ruined cities, lost manuscripts, or contradictory eyewitness accounts. There appears to be a systematic resistance to preserving these models. Were they too powerful, too difficult to control, too reliant on unorthodox ideology or foreign bloodlines? Across empires and eras, centralized authorities have often chosen to suppress, dissolve, or forget these units once their purpose was fulfilled, or once they began to question that purpose. When loyalty becomes absolute, it also becomes dangerous to those in power. The consequences of these disappearances are immeasurable. Had these systems been allowed to persist, humanity might have developed complex command structures, combined arms tactics, or psychological warfare centuries earlier. Perhaps civilian technology would have accelerated in parallel. Instead, each erasure left a void, forcing future civilizations to rediscover concepts that had already been mastered and then forgotten. More disturbingly, we must ask why this suppression repeats. Was it coincidence? Or was there something inherent in these forces, something destabilizing to the balance of power, the control of history, or the narrative of who should wield lethal force? Even today, echoes of these lost doctrines surface in unexpected places: cryptic manuals and military archives, architectural anomalies in old barracks, folklore that doesn't match the official record. Someone remembers. And someone ensures that the memory does not spread too far. Because in the end, the question is not whether these elite units truly existed. The evidence says they did. The real question is why, despite their effectiveness, precision, and historical record, they were allowed to vanish so completely. And if they were erased, who decided they should be?